Commander Rylix Van stood at attention, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the harsh glare of Earth's sun as the transport vessel descended through the atmosphere. Around him, 15 of the Galactic Federation's most decorated military instructors shifted uncomfortably in their environmental suits. Their destination, Earth's most notorious military training facility, Mount McKinley Training Ground. "This has to be some sort of administrative error," muttered Senior Instructor Calyx, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with anxiety. "They expect us, the Federation's elite combat trainers, to learn from human cadets." Van's secondary breathing apparatus constricted with irritation. The humans were barely a Class 3 civilization, having achieved spaceflight less than a century ago. Yet here they were, the Federation's finest, being sent to learn survival skills, from what amounted to children by galactic standards. The shuttle broke through the cloud layer, revealing a landscape that made several officers gasp. Jagged peaks of white thrust up from the earth like broken bones, while vast forests stretched endlessly below. The temperature reading on Van's helmet display showed -15 degrees Celsius, a number that shouldn't have been possible for a habitable training facility. "Approaching McKinley Base," announced the AI pilot. "Local conditions, heavy snowfall expected. Wind speeds at 40 knots. Temperature dropping." The landing pad came into view, and Van's irritation turned to disbelief. Standing in the howling wind were 5 human figures, wearing what appeared to be primitive fiber coverings. No environmental suits, no protective fields, not even basic thermal regulators. The shuttle's door opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and a blast of Arctic air made everyone's environmental suits ping with warnings. A tall human with dark skin stepped forward, frost already forming on his beard. "Welcome to Earth's playground," he said, grinning. "I'm Cadet Captain Jackson Wells, and these are your instructors for the next 3 weeks." He gestured to his team, all of whom looked impossibly young and disturbingly comfortable in the lethal conditions. "There must be some mistake," Van started, his translator struggling with the cold. "We were sent to evaluate human combat readiness for integration into the Federation's advanced training programs," interrupted a shorter human with striking red hair, Cadet Lieutenant Kira Winters. "And you'll evaluate us by learning from us. Starting now." She pointed at their shuttle as its engines powered down. "Your ride just got grounded due to the incoming storm. Those environmental suits you're wearing, they have about 4 hours of power left in these temperatures." The alien officers exchanged alarmed looks. Without power to their suits, the cold would kill most of them in minutes. Their bodies weren't designed for such extreme conditions. "Impossible," declared Training Master Zaxtel, her crystalline form vibrating with indignation. "We demand immediate emergency extraction." "Denied," said Wells cheerfully. "Command's orders. You want to evaluate human combat readiness. This is how we train. This is how we survive. This is how we thrive." He pulled out what appeared to be a primitive cutting tool made of metal. "Now, who wants to learn how to build a snow shelter before your suits fail and you freeze to death?" The next few hours were a blur of confusion, panic, and steadily mounting respect. The human cadets moved through the worsening storm like they were born to it, teaching the alien officers how to pack snow, create wind barriers, and maintain core body temperature through constant movement. When Zaxtel's suit failed first, her crystalline form beginning to crack in the cold, it was Cadet Winters who saved her life. The small human threw off her own outer garments, wrapped them around the alien officer, and taught her how to regulate her crystalline structure to adapt to the temperature. "Impossible," Zaxtel kept saying, but now with wonder rather than dismissal. "Our bodies aren't designed for this. Human bodies aren't designed for this either," Winters explained, her exposed skin reddening in the cold. "We adapted. Evolution is just survival's way of taking notes. Now show me how your crystal matrix responds to pressure changes." By nightfall, all their suits had failed, and the storm had turned into a full blizzard. Yet instead of the mass casualties Van had expected, they were all alive. Uncomfortable, terrified and humbled, but alive. They had built a series of interconnected snow caves, learned to create heat through physical activity, and even managed to melt snow for drinking water using nothing but primitive tools and body heat. "Still think we're not ready for advanced combat training?" Wells asked, setting up something he called a fire using friction and dead plant matter. Van watched the flames dance, creating actual heat without any power source but human determination. "I think," he said slowly, "that we may have been asking the wrong questions all along." A howl echoed through the darkness. Something large, something hungry. The human cadets' expressions shifted instantly from casual to alert, but not afraid. "Lesson 2, announced Wells, hefting a primitive projectile weapon made of wood and sinew. "Let's teach you how Earth's apex predators hunt in the dark." The alien officers huddled closer to the fire, their bodies already changing, adapting, surviving. They were starting to understand why humans had earned their reputation as Deathworlders. The real question wasn't whether humans were ready for advanced training. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for humans. Dawn broke over the McKinley Range with all the gentleness of a plasma blast. Commander Van awoke to find frost coating his exoskeleton, the crystalline patterns shifting as his body struggled to adapt to the sub-zero temperatures. Around him, his fellow officers were emerging from their snow shelters, moving with the stiffness of beings who had survived their first night without environmental regulation. "Rise and shine, officers." Cadet Lieutenant Winters appeared at the camp's entrance, somehow looking fresh despite having taken the night watch. "Hope everyone's ready for some real challenges today." Real challenges. Training Master Zaxtel's crystalline form shimmered with disbelief. "We nearly died last night." "Nah." Cadet Wells emerged from the storm, dragging something large behind him. "If you were going to die, you'd have done it already. Your bodies are adapting faster than you think." He dropped his burden. A massive creature with white fur stained red. Breakfast. The alien officers stared at the carcass in horror. Lieutenant Krelax, their xenobiologist, stepped forward with scientific curiosity. "You hunted this without sonic weapons, without neural disruptors." "Better," Wells grinned, pulling out a primitive metal blade. "We used these, and now you're going to learn how." He tossed knives to each officer, the metal gleaming dully in the morning light. "Welcome to Survival Hunting 101. The next few hours were a crash course in what humans called tracking. The officers learned to read signs in the snow, to understand wind direction, to move silently despite their unfamiliarly heavy clothing. Most disturbing was the humans' insistence that they taste the snow and air. "Your bodies are instruments," explained Cadet Sergeant Raj Kumar, the team's survival specialist. "Better than any tech. You just forgot how to listen to them." A massive crack echoed across the valley, making everyone freeze. Wells' expression turned serious. "Speaking of listening, move." Avalanche. The wall of snow came faster than anything Van had ever seen. His combat training screamed at him to activate emergency protocols, to engage shield generators. But there was no tech to save them. Instead, his body moved on instinct, following the humans' lead as they sprinted for the tree line. "Grab the rope lines," Winters shouted, throwing guidelines to the officers. "Tie in. Don't stop moving." The avalanche hit like a warship's blast. Van felt himself lifted, thrown, buried. In the chaos, he heard Wells' voice. "Push up. Swim. Fight it." Fighting nature itself. It was madness. Yet Van found himself doing exactly that, his crystalline form adapting to the pressure, using techniques learned just hours ago. When the snow settled, they emerged one by one, shaken but alive. "Impossible," breathed Krelax, his scientific detachment cracking. "The force should have shattered our forms." "Your bodies are stronger than you think." Kumar helped dig out the last officer. "Evolution doesn't waste time on fragile designs. Even yours." As they regrouped, something changed in the dynamic between instructors and students. The alien officers began watching their human teachers with new eyes, noting how they constantly scanned the environment, how they moved with the terrain rather than against it. The afternoon brought new challenges. Wells led them to a frozen lake, where they learned to fish with nothing but string and carved sticks. Winters taught them to read weather patterns and cloud formations. Kumar showed them how to preserve meat without technology, using only snow and air. Why? Zaxtel finally asked, her crystalline form now adapting much faster to temperature changes. Why teach us to survive without technology when we have superior tools? Wells looked at her seriously. Because tools break, tech fails. But this, he tapped his head, then his chest. This is millions of years of survival knowledge coded into every cell. Your bodies remember how to survive. You just need to remind them. As if to prove his point, their makeshift camp was attacked that night by what the humans called wolves. Instead of panic, instead of desperate reaching for defunct technology, the alien officers found themselves responding with their newly learned skills. They maintained the fire line, used their voices to intimidate, worked as a unit. When the pack retreated, Van realized his crystalline form had automatically adjusted its structure to appear larger, more threatening, an ancient defense mechanism he hadn't known he possessed. There it is, Winters smiled, noting the change. Your bodies remember. Evolution's memory runs deep. Later, huddled around the fire, Van studied his fellow officers. Krelax's normally smooth skin had developed subtle ridges, better heat retention. Zaxtel's crystalline structure had adopted a new configuration that better distributed weight on snow. They were changing, adapting, surviving. Tomorrow, Wells announced, checking primitive weather instruments, we go hunting. Big game. No tools except what you can carry. No shelter except what you can build. And he grinned, a storm's coming. The alien officers looked at each other, but there was no more horror, no more disbelief. Instead, Van saw something new in their eyes. Anticipation. Their bodies were remembering what their technology had made them forget. They too came from worlds that had forged them in survival's fire. The humans hadn't just been teaching them to survive Earth. They had been teaching them to remember who they were before technology made them forget. As the aurora danced overhead, Van touched his adapted exoskeleton and wondered what other ancient memories lay dormant in their genes, waiting to be awakened by necessity's brutal touch. The night grew colder, the wind howled fiercer, and somewhere in the darkness, wolves called again. But this time, the sound held no terror. They were learning the oldest lesson of all. Adaptation isn't just about surviving. It's about becoming what you were always meant to be. The blizzard hit on the 7th day, turning the world into a howling void of white. Inside their makeshift shelter, Commander Van watched his team with growing fascination. A week ago, they had been the Federation's elite, beings who wouldn't dream of sleeping on frozen ground or eating food they had killed with their own hands. Now they moved with a primitive grace that would have shocked their former selves. Status check, Wells called out, his voice carrying over the storm's rage. The humans stood at the shelter's entrance, observing weather patterns that would have required advanced sensors to detect just days ago. That's not just any storm. That's a killer. Krelax, who had developed an uncanny ability to sense temperature changes through his modified skin, nodded in agreement. Barometric pressures dropping fast. Temperature will hit -40 within hours. Impressive, Winters grinned, adjusting their fire pit's ventilation. You're starting to sound like a Deathworlder. The term, once considered an insult among Federation species, now carried a different weight. They had learned what it truly meant to evolve on a world that constantly tried to kill you, not just survive, but thrive in conditions that should be impossible. We need to move, Wells announced suddenly, his body language shifting to high alert. This shelter won't hold against what's coming. We need to find better ground. Move? In this, Zaxtel's crystalline form had adapted remarkably to the cold, but even she sounded concerned. The storm will tear us apart. The storm isn't what I'm worried about. Kumar pointed to scratch marks on their shelter's outer wall. The megafauna are moving down from the high country. When they run from something, something worse is coming. Van finished, surprising himself with the intuitive leap. A week of survival training had taught him to think like a predator and prey. They packed with practiced efficiency, using techniques that now felt as natural as breathing. Primitive tools were distributed, loads balanced, teams organized. No one needed to be told what to do anymore. They moved like a single organism, each understanding their role through instinct rather than orders. The journey through the storm became a lesson in endurance that pushed them beyond anything they had experienced. The wind threw ice crystals like micro-shrapnel, forcing them to navigate by touch and sound alone. They moved in a chain, each connected to the others by rope, trusting their lives to knots they had learned to tie just days ago. Contact. Wells' voice barely carried over the wind. 3 o'clock, large signatures. Through the wait-out, massive shapes moved like shadows, megafauna, just as Kumar had warned. The creatures stood taller than their shelters, with fur like armor and tusks that could impale a transport vehicle. Hold formation, Winters commanded. They're as blind in this as we are. Use it. The alien officers moved as one, their bodies automatically adjusting to present smaller profiles against the wind. They had learned this dance over the past week, how to be present but invisible, threatening but not a threat. The massive creatures passed within meters, close enough to feel the ground shake. No one moved. No one breathed. They had learned the art of stillness, of becoming part of the environment rather than fighting it. Hours blended into a timeless void of movement and survival. When they finally found suitable shelter, a natural cave system, Kumar somehow sensed through the stone, they were different beings than those who had started the journey. "Look at yourselves," Wells said as they established camp, pride evident in his voice. "Really look." They did. Krelax's skin had developed patterns that mimicked snow crystals, perfect camouflage in their environment. Zaxtel's crystalline structure now shifted fluidly with temperature changes, no longer fighting the cold but working with it. Even Van's own exoskeleton had evolved, developing microtextures that shed ice and trapped heat. "We're becoming something else," Lieutenant Krelax observed, his scientific detachment giving way to wonder. "Something more primitive, more effective." "Not primitive," Winters corrected, stoking their fire to life with practiced ease. "Essential. You're remembering what your species knew before they relied on technology for everything. The knowledge was always there, in your genes, in your instincts." The cave filled with the warmth of their fire and the smell of cooking meat. Another hunt successful, another day survived. But something else filled the space, a growing understanding of what they were truly learning. "It's not about survival techniques, is it?" Van asked finally, watching the flames dance. "This whole training, it's about remembering who we were, who we are beneath the technology." Wells nodded, his face serious in the firelight. "Humanity never forgot. We kept one foot in our past, even as we reached for the stars. That's what makes us dangerous and valuable. We remember what it means to be animals and gods at the same time." Outside, the storm raged on, but its howl no longer sounded threatening. It was the voice of a teacher, harsh but fair, stripping away artifice to reveal truth beneath. "Tomorrow," Kumar announced, checking primitive weather signs they all now understood, "we go higher. The real test is coming." No one questioned what he meant. They could feel it in their bones, in their blood, in the very genetic memory that was reawakening with each passing day. Something waited for them in the heights, something that would either break them completely or forge them into something new. As they settled in for the night, Van realized that the greatest storm wasn't the one outside their shelter. It was the one within each of them, the tempest of transformation that was stripping away millennia of technological dependence to reveal the survival machines they had always been. The question was no longer whether they would survive the training. The question was, What would they become in the process? The ascent began before dawn, when the air was so cold it crystallized their breath into shimmering clouds. Commander Van led the group, his transformed exoskeleton now perfectly adapted to grip the icy terrain. Behind him, 14 Federation officers moved with a grace that would have been impossible 2 weeks ago, their bodies having undergone profound changes. "You feel it?" Wells asked, moving alongside Van with the easy confidence of a mountain predator. "The mountain's watching us." Once, Van would have dismissed such a statement as primitive superstition. Now he understood. His enhanced senses detected subtle vibrations through the ice, changes in air pressure, the movement of wildlife, the living pulse of the mountain itself. "We're being hunted," Krelax announced suddenly, his modified skin patterns shifting to match the dawn-lit snow. The scientist had become their best tracker, his analytical mind perfectly suited to reading nature's signs once he learned to listen. "Good," Winters grinned, checking their primitive weapons. "Means we're getting close to the testing grounds." The testing grounds had been mentioned with an almost religious reverence by their human instructors over the past days. No details were given, only that it would be the ultimate challenge of their training. They'd reached the first plateau by midday. The air was painfully thin, but their bodies had adapted to process oxygen more efficiently. Zaxtel, whose crystalline form once required constant environmental regulation, now refracted sunlight to maintain optimal temperature. "Movement," Kumar whispered, dropping into a crouch. "Big. Multiple signatures." They all felt it, the presence of something ancient and deadly. Through the swirling snow, massive shapes circled their position. The humans called them silver bears, though they bore little resemblance to the earth creatures in their historical records. These were apex predators evolved for high-altitude hunting, with razor-sharp ice crystals growing naturally from their fur. "Formation Delta," Van commanded, and the group moved with fluid precision. No technology, no advanced weapons, just their adapted bodies and the primitive tools they had learned to use as extensions of themselves. The first attack came from above, a massive creature launching itself from an ice shelf. In the past, they would have relied on energy shields and pulse weapons. Now they moved like water around stone, using the beast's momentum against it. Krelax's modified skin secreted a chemical that masked their sense, while Zaxtel's crystalline form created disorienting light patterns. "Now this," Wells shouted over the chaos of battle, his proper Deathworld training. The fight became a dance of primal energy and instinct. Van found himself moving in ways his species hadn't needed to for millennia, his body remembering ancestral combat patterns bred into his genes. Around him, his fellow officers displayed similar transformations, each accessing deep genetic memories of when their species were warriors rather than technicians. When the last silver bear retreated, leaving them bloodied but victorious, something fundamental had changed. They stood straighter, moved more confidently, their bodies humming with awakened power. "You understand now?" Winters asked, treating a gash on her arm with casual indifference. "This is what we've been trying to show you. This is why humanity seems so savage to the rest of the galaxy." "You never lost this," Van realized, watching his team tend to their wounds with practiced efficiency. While the rest of us built walls of technology between ourselves and our true nature, humanity kept one foot in the primitive world. "Primitive," Kumar laughed, the sound echoing off the ice walls. "There's nothing primitive about being what evolution spent millions of years perfecting. Your bodies are the most advanced technology in the galaxy. You just forgot how to use them." The rest of the day was spent learning to properly honor their kills, another primitive practice that now held deep meaning. They used every part of the creatures, wasting nothing, understanding finally that survival wasn't about dominating nature, but becoming part of its cycle. As night fell, they made camp on the plateau, the aurora painting the sky in colors that seemed more vivid to their enhanced senses. Their bodies, pushed to adapt by extreme conditions and constant challenges, had undergone remarkable transformations. Krelax's epidermis could now actively camouflage and regulate temperature. Zaxtel's crystalline structure had developed organic heating and cooling systems more efficient than any artificial technology. Even Van's exoskeleton had evolved beyond its original specifications, developing sensory capabilities that made their old environmental suits seem primitive by comparison. Tomorrow, Wells announced as they gathered around the fire, we reached the true testing grounds. Everything until now has been preparation. What should we expect? Zaxtel asked, her voice carrying new harmonics that could cut through storm winds. Expect. Winters smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight like a predator's. Expect to become what you were always meant to be. Expect to understand why humanity terrifies the galaxy even as we fascinate it. Later, as most of the team slept, Van stood watch with Wells, both of them scanning the darkness with senses honed by weeks of survival training. When we return, Van said quietly, how do we explain this transformation to the Federation Council? How do we make them understand what we've become? Wells was silent for a long moment, watching the stars wheel overhead. You don't explain it, he finally said. You show them. Show them that the future of space exploration doesn't lie in better technology, but in remembering what we were before we needed technology to survive. A howl echoed from the darkness. Not a wolf this time, but something larger, more ancient, something that had evolved in Earth's harshest environments, something that waited for them in tomorrow's challenge. Van felt his transformed body respond to the call, not with fear, but with anticipation. They were no longer the beings who had arrived in environmental suits, dependent on technology for basic survival. They had become something else, something that straddled the line between civilization and savagery, between technology and primal power. Tomorrow would prove whether that transformation was complete. The testing grounds revealed themselves at sunrise, a vast natural arena carved into the mountain's peak, where the air was so thin it made their enhanced lungs strain. Ice walls rose like crystal battlements against the crimson sky, and ancient caves dotted the cliffs like watching eyes. Welcome to the Crucible, Wells announced, his voice carrying the weight of tradition. For 10,000 years, Earth's warriors have proven themselves here. Today, you join that legacy. Commander Van surveyed his transformed team. 3 weeks ago, they had been the Federation's elite, beings who relied on advanced technology for everything. Now they moved like apex predators, their bodies changed by necessity and awakened genetic memory. The test is simple, Winters explained, checking their primitive weapons. Survive the next 24 hours. No rules except one. Stay alive. Before anyone could respond, a sound like thunder rolled across the arena. From the caves emerged creatures that seemed pulled from prehistoric nightmares, massive armored beings that Earth's fossil records called short-faced bears, though they had evolved far beyond their ancient ancestors. They've been waiting. Kumar grinned, his teeth flashing in the dawn light. The mountain's guardians. The true test of a Deathworlder. The creatures moved with impossible speed for their size, forcing the team to scatter. But they didn't panic. They didn't reach for non-existent technology. Instead, they responded with instincts honed by 3 weeks of brutal training. Krelax's modified skin shifted patterns rapidly, creating confusion in the predator's vision. Zaxtel's crystalline form refracted sunlight into dazzling arrays, while her newly developed resonance abilities disrupted the beast's equilibrium. Remember, Wells shouted as he vaulted over a charging creature. You're not fighting them. You're proving you belong here. Understanding clicked into place. This wasn't about defeating the Guardians. It was about demonstrating they could survive in a world that bred such beings. About proving they could adapt, thrive, and evolve in conditions that should have been impossible. Hours blurred into a continuous flow of movement, strategy, and primal combat. They used every skill they had learned: hunting, tracking, environmental awareness. But more importantly, they used abilities they had rediscovered in themselves, ancient adaptations their species had forgotten they possessed. As darkness fell, bringing temperatures that would have killed their former selves instantly, they found themselves moving in perfect synchronization with the environment. The ice wasn't an obstacle, but an ally. The thin air wasn't a handicap, but a challenge their bodies had adapted to meet. Look, Winters pointed to the aurora exploding overhead. The final test begins. The light show wasn't natural. It was too intense, too focused. As it built to impossible brightness, something changed in the testing grounds. The guardian beasts retreated, and in their place came a presence that made every evolved sense they possessed scream in recognition. Through the crystalline walls emerged beings of pure energy, the mountain's true guardians. Ancient records called them the Aurora Walkers, though no one knew if they were natural phenomena, evolved beings, or something else entirely. Don't fight, Wells advised as the energy beings approached. Let them judge. The Aurora Walkers moved through their group like living lightning, touching each officer in turn. Van felt ancient memories stirring in his genes, memories of when his species first crawled from their primordial oceans, of every adaptation and evolution that had led to this moment. He saw Krelax's skin blazing with bioluminescence, patterns matching the aurora overhead. Zaxtel's crystalline form sang in harmonies that shouldn't have been possible, resonating with the energy beings. Each officer manifested abilities that transcended both their original nature and their recent adaptations. "This is what we are," Winters said softly, watching the display. "Not just survivors, but evolution's children. Every species carries this potential. Humanity just never forgot how to access it." As dawn approached, the Aurora Walkers retreated, leaving them changed once again. They had passed the test, but more importantly, they had understood its purpose. This wasn't about proving themselves to humanity. It was about remembering who they were beneath the layers of civilization and technology. "The Federation Council won't believe this," Zaxtel observed as they made their way down the mountain, their enhanced bodies moving with fluid grace through terrain that would have killed them weeks ago. "They don't need to believe," Wells replied. "They need to remember. Every spacefaring species evolved on worlds that try to kill them. You've just remembered how to be what you always were." Van touched his transformed exoskeleton, feeling the power thrumming through its adapted structure. "We're not going back to what we were," he realized. "We can't." "No," Kumar agreed. "But you can go forward. Show the galaxy that the future isn't about escaping our nature through technology. It's about remembering that we are technology. Millions of years of evolution, adaptation, and survival coded into every cell." As they reached the base camp where their journey had begun, they found their old environmental suits waiting. The once essential technology now seemed like children's toys, a crutch they had outgrown. "What happens now?" Krelax asked, his transformed skin shifting colors with his emotions. "Now," Winters smiled. "Now you go back to the stars. But you go as something new. Beings who remember what it means to be forged by adversity. Show them what's possible when you embrace both sides of your nature. And remember," Wells added, his eyes reflecting the rising sun, "Earth will be here. The mountain will be waiting. Because sometimes, to move forward, you have to remember where you came from." Commander Van looked at his team, no longer just officers, but evolution's children, awakened to their full potential. They had come seeking to evaluate humanity's readiness for advanced training. Instead, they had discovered something far more valuable: the power that lay dormant in their own genes, waiting to be awakened by necessity's touch. The Federation would never be the same, but then, neither would they. Above them, the mountain stood silent against the dawn, its ancient heights holding secrets older than civilization. And in the depths of space, countless worlds waited to test the beings they had become, no longer just cosmic travelers, but true children of evolution, ready to face whatever challenges the universe held. The story of their transformation would spread through the galaxy like wildfire, but the truth could only be understood by experiencing it, by remembering what it meant to be forged in survival's fire, to become what necessity demanded, to be, in the truest sense, a Deathworlder.